Immigrating to Canada. It seems like a lot of paperwork, but I'm up for it. Now what? Which path is best for me? There are no limits to the majestic future which lies before the mighty expanse of Canada with its viral, aspiring, cultured, and generous-hearted people. Sir Winston Churchill. Finding your way in. Immigrating to Canada requires a lot of time, effort, and a bit of money. The paperwork can feel endless, and it's tough to know where to start. Luckily, this section will break down a few of the most common options and explain what to expect. Permanent residency. If you want to live, work, and study anywhere in Canada, your best bet is to become a permanent resident. The benefits are similar to having a green card in the United States. Study permits and work permits are also an option if you're looking for a more temporary move, which we'll also explore. Becoming a permanent resident comes with a catch, however. Once you're approved, you must still fulfill the Canadian residency requirement to maintain your status. You must live in Canada for at least 730 days, 2 years out of every 5 years. Once you've fulfilled your residency requirement, you could also apply for Canadian citizenship, or you can stay a permanent resident indefinitely as long as you follow the rules. Got it? The first step is figuring out which path to permanent residency you want to take. There are two main paths to choose from, and two options that may allow you to apply for permanent residency at a later date. Although there are other ways to enter Canada, perhaps you're a Ghanaian billionaire who'd like to move to Canada and invest your money building a new factory in Saskatchewan. Guess what? It's fairly easy for people like you to immigrate. The rest of us schmucks must enter the country like normal human beings with an average sized bank account. With average sized bank accounts. So here are the most likely avenues on offer to regular people. Number one, apply for express entry as a skilled immigrant. Number two, get sponsored by a Canadian spouse or family member. And here are some alternate routes to legally living in Canada without first applying for permanent residency. Number three, enroll as a student at a Canadian university or college. This path requires a study permit. You may be eligible to extend your study permit and at a later date to apply for permanent residency. Have a job offer in hand. This path requires a work permit. You may be eligible at a later date to apply for permanent residency. If it's not obvious to you which option is going to work best for you, here are a few questions to help you think about it. Do you have a job offer in Canada? Check with human resources about the next step. If they're not handling the application for you, you'll need to apply for a work permit. Are you in high school and looking for an affordable place to go to college? Apply to Canadian colleges and universities and come with a study permit. Do you have a Canadian spouse that would sponsor you? Apply to be sponsored by a spouse. Can you find one? Kidding. Lol. Do you have family in Canada who would sponsor you? Apply to be sponsored by a family member. Do you have the experience or education that would qualify you to come to Canada as a skilled immigrant? Apply for express entry. Are you a billionaire? Get your butler to figure out where to send the wire transfer. Your papers, please. No matter which route you take to apply for entry into Canada, you'll be required to provide a boatload of paperwork to support your application. So take a moment to locate and organize important papers. Request ones from relevant agencies that you don't have on hand, and make copies of the one you'll need to submit. If you've had legal issues in the past, be aware that will come up during the application process, and you may need to provide additional documentation to explain any such issues. Keep in mind that a police certificate can take ages to get once you've submitted your request to the relevant police department. Plan to ask for it as soon as you've begun the application process. Depending on what kind of application you choose to submit, you may be asked to provide any of the following: bank statements, birth certificate, current resume, additional evidence providing proof of a real relationship, love letters, emails, social media posts, photographs, evidence of joint finances, etc., if applying to be sponsored by a spouse, FBI background check, language proficiency test results, letter of acceptance from a Canadian college or university, marriage certificate, medical records, passport, police certificate, proof of a job offer, proof of education, tax returns for the last 3 years. Possible barriers to immigration that may require additional documentation and may negatively affect or delay your application include criminal record, missing documents or an incomplete application, unclear family situations such as pending divorce, adoption, or a custody dispute, untruthful or unverifiable statements during the application process. Apply for express entry as a skilled immigrant. Average wait time 6 months. One common way to begin a life in Canada is to come as a skilled immigrant via the express entry program. In 80% of cases, an express entry application is approved in less than 6 months. The main advantage to the express entry program, apart from its speediness, is that everything can be done online. All necessary documents can be scanned and uploaded, and fees can be paid via secure online payment methods. It also doesn't require you to have existing contacts or family in Canada. You also don't need to have a job offer in order to apply. In fact, according to Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada IRCC, 90% of express entry candidates who received an invitation to apply ITA invitation to apply for permanent residency in the first half of 2017 did not have a job offer. This path is for professionals who have education and experience in their chosen field. It's also meant to bring in workers who can fill gaps in the existing job market. People who work in fields in which there aren't enough Canadians to fill necessary roles. These days, that often means people who work in finance, engineering, tech, architecture, government administration, or medicine, as well as workers skilled in trades like welding and carpentry. It usually doesn't apply to careers like teaching, where there are loads of qualified Canadians ready to fill those positions. The steps for express entry are: number one, head to the Government of Canada website, canada.ca, and search for express entry. Fill out a quick form to determine whether you're eligible to apply. Gather the required documents. Number two, submit an express entry profile online and have it accepted. You'll be assigned a score, more on this later, based on your application. If your score is high enough, you'll get an invitation to apply for permanent residence. Number three, fill out your permanent residency application within 60 days of being invited to apply. Express entry applications are assigned a comprehensive ranking system CRS score out of 1200 or 1200 points. Points are given for skills and experience, education, proficiency in English, and even the language skills of your partner and family members. Additional points are assigned if you're fluent in French or have a Canadian degree, an immediate family member who is already a citizen, or a valid job offer. There's a quiz on the Government of Canada website that lets you see in advance how many points you might earn if you were to apply. Just stopping by? Americans and European Union nationals can visit Canada for up to 6 months without a visa. You can apply for an extension, but this is granted at the discretion of border control personnel. Read It's Risky to Bank On. If you're just looking for an extended vacation to Canada, visiting for a few months as a tourist may be your best bet. Make sure to have the return ticket in hand to show border control. Officers may ask for evidence that you actually plan on heading back to the States once your trip is done. Notice that you can't work while you're here on vacation. If you're planning to work in Canada or want to stay longer than 6 months, you'll need to figure out which path you want to take to do that legally. Get sponsored by a family member or spouse. Average processing time 12 months. This is another common path to permanent residency in Canada. If you've already got family members who are citizens or permanent residents, or if you're married to a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, this option takes a bit longer than the other options due to the additional paperwork involved and the high number of applicants. In the case of a spousal sponsorship, it requires a lot of supplemental information to prove you're both in love and not trying to cheat the system. Be prepared to deliver social media evidence of your relationship, a list of people who attended your wedding, and the dates when you met each other's friends and families. There will also likely be an in person interview with a Canadian immigration officer. Sound familiar? That's because the plot of the proposal with Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds. Number one, find out if your spouse or relative is eligible to sponsor you. For starters, they must be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident living in Canada. Both parties need to gather the necessary documents. See the list of potential documents you need to gather on here and find the checklist online at canada.ca and send in your required parts of the application. Sponsors need to prove they've got enough money in the bank to support the applicant if needed. For example, applicants need to prove they aren't violent criminals and such. Once the application for sponsorship is being processed, a case officer will contact you and alert you to any additional document requests as well as arrange to schedule your interview. Once the application is accepted, the applicant will have a limited amount of time to enter Canada and begin life as a permanent resident. Enrolling as a student at a Canadian university or college. Average processing time 2 weeks. Congrats on your choice to get an education in Canada. The schools are top notch, and the degree won't put you in a debt for life, or at least not as much debt as US education requires. International tuition fees for a Bachelor of Arts at McGill University, for example, are about $16,000 Canadian per year. Compare that with the University of Michigan's out of state fees of nearly $50,000. It's insane. It's a wonder Canadians it's a wonder Canadian schools aren't more packed with Americans trying to save money. Anyways, once you've been accepted to a program in Canada, you'll need to apply for a student visa online and pay a fee. This will be valid for the length of your study program and a few weeks afterwards. Having a job offer in hand. Average processing time 2 weeks. Keep in mind that hiring someone from outside Canada requires a lot of paperwork and certifications, and that most employers aren't going to bother. So if the plan is just to apply for Canadian jobs while living in the United States, you might find yourself out of luck. Big corporations or large institutions like banks are probably more likely to offer jobs to non-Canadians because their recruiters and human resource departments are familiar with the process and will be able to undertake the necessary steps at their end. And these likely won't be entry-level positions, but rather managerials or professional ones. But if you do get an offer, congrats. If you've got the right experience that Canadian employers are looking for, this is one of the easiest ways to move to Canada. Once you have a valid offer, you'll need to apply for an employer-specific work permit. This can be done online with the help of your employer. Once you're granted a work permit, you're allowed to work for that specific employer. If you leave the position or are fired, the permit is no longer valid. Beware of fraud. Canadians can be crooks too. Keep in mind that whatever path you choose will cost you money. There are basic application and processing fees payable to government agencies at every step. Educate yourself about what kind of legitimate fees to expect from the official Canadian government website, www.canada.ca. There may also be fees associated with getting your FBI background check, for example, as well as fees to send your documents by certified mail. If you choose to hire an accredited immigration professional to help with the process, you're likely looking at a few extra $1,000s on top of the government fees. Please keep in mind that there are hundreds of organizations out there offering Canadian immigration services. It can be confusing figuring out what's worth your time. Every year, people swindle hopeful immigrants by taking advantage of them. Do your research before engaging in any of these activities. Look for companies or counsel that employs professional attorneys of good standing and have a track record of submitting successful immigration applications. Know your rights.